Thank you, Tessa. You say it so much better than I can. And you say it in Italian also. So forgive me for giving this talk in English. And I'm just getting used to this interesting effect of hearing myself magically speak in Italian through our translator, who is in the box over here. And I must say it's also a real pleasure to be here in Modena on a beautiful morning to see such a large and enthusiastic audience spending their Sunday listening to ideas. And in one sense, I suppose that is the real luxury of our times, to be able to stop, to switch off your computer and do something with people, because we are now the victims of this world in which we are always online, in which we've lost some of those things which seem so important about the world. However, my talk today is about luxury, and I start with some of the words that the architect Rem Koolhaas used on it. Koolhaas once said, "Luxury is stability. Luxury is waste," he claimed. "Luxury is generous. Luxury is intelligent. Luxury is rough. Luxury is attention." He concluded, unarguably, that luxury is not shopping. It's worth pointing out that behind all this, there was a commission for Koolhaas from Miuccia Prada to help her redefine the nature of her business. What would a Prada shop look like in the future? How would her company, committed always to creative experimentation, look like in the near future? Actually, the fluctuation between pleasure and shame that comes from the compulsion to acquire too much too fast is exactly what a certain aspect of what we describe as luxury has become. It is a kind of sickness which takes us from binge to nausea. It wasn't always like that. The shopping phenomenon is the result of an enormous and very recent acceleration in the rate at which we consume. And the impact on this phenomenon of consumption by way of the internet has yet to be understood. And again, given the signs that we are on the edge of a collapse in bricks and mortar retailing, one has to acknowledge Koolhaas's foresight in other ways. It was just before the Prada Commission that shopping was in its last days, a beast in its death agonies, and therefore, as Koolhaas put it, absolutely uncontrollable as it lashed out blindly in every direction. As Amazon drives all before it, all that is left for more traditional forms of retailing is the shop as a kind of museum to be constructed in tourist hotspots from Las Vegas to Copenhagen. Luxury has had other meanings in the past. It used to be the respite that mankind found for itself from the once daily struggle for survival. Luxury was the pleasure to be found in understanding the quality of our material possessions that were thoughtfully and carefully made. Luxury was once that aspect of the nature of an object that allows us to share the pleasure that it gave its designer or its maker. Luxury is a quality that is a reflection of the intelligence that... What was I doing wrong? As well as the tactile sensation that comes from holding or using it. The solace that luxury could offer is what encouraged even the most brutal and violent of despots to underwrite scholars and craftsmen and artists throughout history. Alexander, Augustus, Napoleon, Mitterrand were all leaders who used buildings and things to underscore who they were and what their regime stood for. And because of the resources required to create such luxuries, it is a quality that also became a signal of status. distinguishing one social group from another. In contrast, the version of luxury embraced by the current President of the United States of America is certainly revealing about his ambitions, but lacks some of the more profound aspects of the concept. Scarcity can make luxury from out of the simplest of things. When the alternative is a hand-drawn well, a kilometre trek away in the blistering sun, an electric pump, along with a reliable power supply and a length of plastic pipe, can bring a whole community the previously unimaginable luxury of a constant supply of water. But when the pump is running 24 hours every day, and each tap in the village is primed to deliver clean water at any moment, then a remarkable privilege no longer seems like luxury. It has become the most basic of entitlements, and to lose it is to be brutalized. Yet compare the sensation of a mouthful of pure, chilled alpine water, savored under the heat of the sun, with a mundane experience of filling a tumbler from the tap. Provided that it is a choice freely made, rather than an inescapable daily necessity, that gulp, taken from a stream splashing across a rock, is by far the most intense and emotionally charged, and it might be said, far more luxurious experience of the two. Luxury then embodies a paradox of the ordinary made special, and the special become ordinary. The contemporary manufacture of luxury is based on creating objects in a world of tap water that can replicate the essence of that gulp and transplant it into products capable of being sold. The primary target of those who manufacture luxury is the escalating class of the affluent. In his key text, Ways of Seeing, John Berger divides the world into two. He divides it on the one side between those whose economic role is first to labor and then to consume, and on the other, those who employ their capital to exploit the first category. Berger suggested that the rich were excluded from the obligation to become dutiful consumers. He claimed that they don't have to put up with the advertising that the rest of us must endure, since they are left to keep their wealth. This is hardly a reflection of the world as we know it. The numbers of the hugely wealthy have exploded, and as a result, the manufacture of luxury has expanded unstoppably from a craft into an industry to accommodate the tastes and pander to the weaknesses of the affluent, but also to feed off their affluence. As a result, the pursuit of luxury is more ubiquitous now than at any previous moment in history. In the absence of scarcity, it has acquired a role beyond its use as a coded social signal to suggest privilege. Luxury has become industrialized. At a secular moment in which neither magic nor religion, the original mainsprings of art, have quite the prestige that they once enjoyed, luxury can be understood as a synthetic alternative to them. For certain objects, the concept of luxury is used to create the aura that once art provided. You do not have to believe in God or in magic to be seduced, in however minor a way, by a banal version of luxury. Certainly luxury has become the driving force fueling Western industrial economies. They have abandoned basic manufacturing to China and focus instead on building cars that reek of carefully tanned leather and whose heavy doors click shut reassuringly softly. This is not enough in the long term to secure Europe's economy. We are in the midst of a violent mood swing. Cars will soon be either generic or a Ferrari. They will be self-driving autonomous vehicles with which we will have none of the emotional engagement with which you understand cars now. We will summon them with our smartphone to collect us from wherever we choose and to deliver them to our destination. We will have no need of a parking space, a car park, or a garage. We will have no sense of having our ego flattered or take pleasure in the experience of using such a vehicle. At the other extreme, cars will be sold as if they were works of art. They will be made in tiny numbers, Ferrari and McLaren and Bentley and a few others who never build more than 10,000 cars each a year. Owning one of them will be the equivalent of having a private pilot's license. They will be collected. It is remarkable now how many Ferrari owners fail to stop at one and who build themselves galleries in which to show off their collections. Ferrari already sells cars in what is closer to the gallery system of the art world rather than a conventional car dealership. An art dealer will severely restrict the secondary market, choosing who they sell to, maintaining their value through scarcity, with prices protected over the long term in auction sales. This, of course, is a situation which has provided ample scope for fakes and questions of attribution, exactly as if these cars were a piece of art made by Damien Hirst. Europe is in the business of making expensive luggage, wristwatches of impossible precision, and military aircraft made from exotic carbon fiber and alloys that are capable of flying at the speed of sound. These are conspicuously all luxuries of a kind. We don't need them, our cultures do not need them, and yet if we didn't make them and buy them or sell them, we would all suffer, so in a sense we certainly do need them. Yet luxury is an elusive concept in the contemporary context. The wonder is that it has survived at all as a phenomenon when there are so many more possessions and they are so much easier to make than in the past when skills were passed from generation to generation. It's even more remarkable that luxury has managed to retain its allure given the archaic nature of so many objects that are notionally the embodiment of luxury. And we are in a period in which objects themselves are losing their allure in a digital world. It seems to be easier to imbue categories of object that are on the brink of redundancy with the quality of luxury than it is to create new ones that can demonstrate it. The wristwatch still retains its prestige, but the fountain pen has lost what attraction it once had. The wristwatch, in contrast, has been able to maintain its position as a desirable artifact in very much the same shape that it assumed at the start of the 20th century, when Cartier first started to make wristwatches for men. The traditional wristwatch has managed to see off the eruption of quartz technology despite a wobble over the introduction of digital as opposed to analog faces. What makes the wristwatch different from the pen is that its form was born from a collaboration between the jeweler who made the case with the mechanical movement makers who in the early days supplied them with the working parts. It's interesting to reflect on the fact that Apple has retained the form of the wristwatch, a kind of vote of confidence in the form. Jewelry has a long history in understanding the emotional and tactile interaction between people and things. This is an interaction which every kind of personal object requires, but few achieve. And the fact that Apple were prepared to make what they call a watch, even one that used gold, was in effect a vote of confidence in the idea. Archaic technologies do have their appeal. Enthusiasts for audio technology have kept the wax disc alive, and there are manufacturers who have started to use valves rather than printed circuits. But the charming easily tips over into the preposterous when digital readouts have replaced the dials and instruments on the dashboards of mass-market cars. How can a walnut fascia, designed as the backdrop to carefully delineated sets of dials, be made to accommodate them convincingly? And when this happens, walnut turns into an anachronism in a car, not an asset. It signals not luxury, but pretension. Because the cell phone is permanently in the hand and close to the mouth and the ear, it has a relationship with its user as intimate as it will have with a wristwatch. The visual interface, the sounds that they make, the mechanisms that protect their keypads offer plenty of scope for a designer to give them a personality. But when mobile phone makers attempt to produce what they call luxury products, they have a much harder time of it than watchmakers. The conventional strategy has been to use precious metals and stones in the most conspicuous way possible. But a gold-plated case for an object that is technically redundant after 6 months looks gratingly profligate, even in the midst of a culture of excess. Attempting at creating luxury laptops have been equally futile. Wooden keyboards, leather cases, or even carbon fiber shells have simply looked inept. It's the speed of the hard drive and the effectiveness of the operating system that makes us like a computer, not the appropriation of anachronistic materials that gives a computer its personality. Torsten Veblen's book, The Theory of the Leisure Class, was famous for it came up with the purposes of conspicuous consumption. These are things that you don't have to own in order to live comfortably, but when you do have them, they prove either that you don't have to work or that you have access to easy credit. And so, in a sense, you have no choice but to own them, if you believe that you have a position to maintain. Such objects, Veblen suggested, needed not just to be inherently beautiful, they also had to be understood as looking beautiful if they are to achieve their purpose, essentially as peacock tails. Simply looking expensive was not enough. Signaling value and ambition needed to be done in the right way. With certain kinds of object, you need to know a little about them to understand just how precious they really are. Not everybody can be an insider. That is the point. People want to communicate a message through the medium of their houses, and their context needs to be understood by people who are looking at it. In exactly the same way, an expert bicycle courier uses a short length of chain to hold down the saddle, not just because they are so expensive to replace, but to show that they belong to a particular group. It's a group whose members believe that brakes spoil the look of their machines and who don't like derailleur gears. They understand the occult language of the initiates, and they know what makes apparently identical machines so different, each from another. The world is made up of limitless numbers of groups of such initiates. They are those who have become obsessive about sunglasses and expect you to know that their specially made frames come from the same workshop that made the pair that Steve McQueen wore in the film The Getaway before they take you seriously. And there are snowboarders and surfers and motorcyclists and music buffs and hunters and fishermen, all of whom have their own subcultures defined in terms of objects and the expertise that goes with them. The traces that Bill Gates will leave behind him are of very different nature from those of 18th century aristocrats. It's not very likely that they will take the form of his house outside Seattle, despite the very best efforts of his decorator, Thierry Despont. Gates or Larry Ellison or any number of dot-com hedge fund or Russian oligarchs might well commission Mark Newson or Philippe Stark to decorate their Gulfstream jets. But beneath the paint and the naugahyde, it will be exactly the same as every other Gulfstream jet. And if they were to furnish a house for them, there is no sign that they will achieve anything to match the scope and creativity of the combination in the past of the Adam brothers and Thomas Chippendale. Perhaps only the yacht-building mania among today's super-rich comes close to combining the scale and the quality of what their predecessors tried to achieve. The obsession of Raymond Abramovich with boats and ships has driven him to commission the building of a ship 500 feet long, in much the same way as his fellow billionaires are fighting to build the world's tallest skyscraper. Aesthetically more impressive, but equally indulgent, is the America's Cup phenomenon, with a circle of the wealthy funding boats of genuine beauty built in the pursuit of speed and ego, and with an ambition for excellence that the great craftsmen of the past would certainly have recognized. Contemporary luxury depends on finding new things to do that are difficult. It can be using a lot of material. It can be concealing the stitches on a suit or the welds in a car body where one panel meets another. Carving a curve is easier in wood than it is in forming metal body panels in a car. So luxury cars come with complex curves that are difficult to form in metal, and cheaper models have tended to have boxier silhouettes or simpler curves. The difference between the original Citroën de Chevaux and the complex multiple curves of a contemporary Maserati. If a machine can cut a piece of wood objectively more accurately than a craftsman working only with hand tools, but the craftsman's work is understood as being of higher quality, we face the paradoxical situation of machine-made artifacts deliberately made to introduce imperfections to suggest quality. When Torsten Veblen wrote his book, hand craftsmanship was still accorded the highest status. Since then, we have become accustomed to the universal presence of technology and what it can offer. Our visual perceptions of what constitutes quality have shifted accordingly. A life of luxury implies a life without physical labor, but a luxurious object is not necessarily an undemanding one. It is not just in making that effort may be required, but also in maintenance, polishing silver and brass and copper, maintaining leather and scrubbing stone were once the center of domestic life. Luxurious fabrics are those most closely associated with high maintenance. A linen sheet needs to be laundered and ironed every time that it is used. A shirt that is made of a fabric that does not need ironing retains a residual stigma. It cannot be truly luxurious if it is too easy to use, despite the best efforts of the expanding market for high-performance clothes that use water-repellent, lightweight, crumple-proof textiles. Understatement is a recurring theme of what is described as aristocratic taste. It is the embodiment of the idea that it is bad manners to make your own wealth so conspicuous that it is constantly on show, reminding those who are less wealthy just how much more that they own than you do. The adoption of an impeccably tailored plain exterior still provides all the signals needed to indicate to those who understand what they are looking at and the resources necessary to achieve it. Self-restraint might also be understood as enlightened self-interest. During the Red Brigade years in the 1970s, the Italian bourgeoisie gave up jewelry and took to driving themselves around in Milan in well-lived-in Fiats for fear of attracting the attention of kidnappers. Dressing down, of course, quickly became part of the trappings of a certain kind of way of life, just as less affluent adolescent Italians started carrying their car radios around with them like handbags, partly to stop them from being stolen, but partly also to demonstrate that they had a car worth stealing from. Sheer abundance has left affluent consumers sated, so the signs of luxury are manipulated to trigger the gratification that it brings without the substance. It's like bypassing the physical senses and going straight to the brain to fire the neural networks that make us feel hungry or tired or contented or angry, or in the case of luxury, soothed and reassured. Luxury is partly created by the use of materials associated with it. The precious and the rare are generally the most sought after. So plastic, which is neither, has had trouble in being accepted as a noble material. But so has titanium. Despite the best efforts of the titanium mining industry, the metal has never become the modern version of gold that it hoped one day it would be. The visual and tactile signs of luxury are closely associated with value. They are the triggers that make us believe that one object is worth more than another with the same functional characteristics. It can be signaled by audible cues, the sound of a car engine, or of a solidly built door closing, or the clip of a catch fastening into place. Or they can be signs that suggest performance. Try as we might, we cannot help but interpret an air intake grille on the side of a well-chiseled car bonnet as adding to its value. The more that an object was capable of doing was once understood as being a direct correlation with its worth. The profusion of dials and gauges on electric equipment of a certain age was a reflection of the need to inform owners just how much that machine was capable of, or even if the information conveyed by all those beautifully precise dancing needles was of no practical relevance. Manipulative luxury is not limited to the objects we use or the packaging that they come swaddled in. It is also used to shape the choreography of daily life. This is nowhere more clear than in the manufacture of a sense of luxury in air travel. If you look at the floor plan of the business class cabin of a Virgin Atlantic Airbus 330, you will see a herringbone pattern for the seats that irresistibly suggests the sleeping quarters of an 18th century slave ship. These are the rows of the seats in which the would-be financial masters of the universe are prepared to sleep, their heads inches away from a stranger, secure in the belief that they are traveling in luxury. But of course, anybody who really worries about this sort of thing would never want to be seen traveling on a commercial flight. The private jet is the entry level for luxury travel for a certain class now. Yet even this, at its most basic, offers conditions not dissimilar to those of a caravan, with a lavatory behind a curtain, which the crew share with the passengers, even if it does avoid the cattle pens that passengers attempting to board a low-cost carrier must now endure. There are still people who bind books, but it has turned from a practical skill into a means of self-expression. and there are those who use film rather than digital photography or vinyl recording techniques. But handcraft for its own sake has become marginalized to the point of extinction. It has been redeployed to within the industrial system, where it provides the essential skills needed to make the machines which make the things that we use. And it is these skills that underpin luxury in a contemporary sense. Crafts are essential to building aircraft, to making spacecraft, and to building the entire Formula One car industry. Perfection may not be easy, but at least it's not hard to understand what it is. Perfection is what drives Dieter Rams and Jonathan Ive as they and their teams invest limitless energy in achieving the perfect radius curve and the perfect finish that shows no marks. The search for perfection is what created the language of modernism, and as such, it has taken on something of the flavor of a period piece. Imperfection is more elusive and a more difficult quality to work with, not least because it is harder to measure, and it can be equally a positive quality, one that speaks of the more agnostic times that we now live in when compared to the moral certainties of design in the 1930s. Attempting perfection in manufacturing is to know what to aim for in the design of every joint, the creation of every seam, and the shaping of every surface. To find justifications for the positive qualities of imperfection, you cannot blindly commit to a mechanical process or a template and expect the desired outcomes simply through the exercise of skill or persistence or consistency. It demands the exercise of a different kind of judgment. The pursuit of the perfect is rooted in one of the key issues of the early days of mass production, when many components were made using molds. The process of filling and refilling a mold with hot metal inevitably wears away its sharp lines, degrades its finish, and so diminishes the quality of the copies it can be used to make. In the course of manufacturing, each new example, bit by bit, loses the precision that the mold began with and results in less and less perfect versions of the original. It is this phenomenon that is behind the concept of the limited edition. To make just 9 examples of an object or a print is to guarantee that each of them will have a certain quality. Conversely, irregularity has been understood as synonymous with the less than perfect, and so with the inferior. Mass production has looked to find ways to maintain the perfection of every piece that comes out of the mold. For a designer, the most difficult thing about looking for the positive qualities in imperfection is the demand it places on them to justify every aesthetic decision they make. It introduces the possibility of subjective as well as objective qualities in design. The possibility of perfection implies the existence of an original with the special qualities that implies, which copies can only hope to attain. But mass-produced objects are the outcome of industrial processes in which, though there may be a prototype or prototypes, there is no original on which all subsequent copies are more or less accurately based. There is only the tool or the idea. There is no single ideal object with what Walter Benjamin called the aura of art, creating a category of object to distinguish it in an age of mechanical reproduction from the limitless copies. It is the mass-produced nature of the object that is the point of the exercise. It means that every Volkswagen from a particular production run is exactly the same as every other Volkswagen. Aside from the optional extras, any deviation from the car specification represents a defect. Each car has the same characteristics, the characteristics of the particular model, just as each sheet of paper in a notebook is the same as every other sheet, and every copy of an edition of a newspaper is identical to every other copy. It is in many ways a characteristic that is antithetical to the human desire for the distinctive and the individual, the distinctive desire to make our possessions our own, or the impulse that the carpet weavers of the Muslim world had to build imperfection into their work with loving care as an expression of religious humility in the face of the Almighty. It is the same way that the Dutch designer Helle Jongerius, one of the more influential designers of her generation, works. She is not a maker herself, shaping objects at one at a time to a specific brief for a specific user, each one showing the distinctive mark of the making process, the hand, and the countless individual decisions on which it depends. She works within the framework of the industrial system and all that has to offer in terms of the potential to spread the costs of tooling across unlimited production runs. She appreciates the way in which our understanding of the material world is informed by our familiarity with the potential of industrial production. But she is also interested in using industrial production with a new level of sophistication. It's not that she wants to use a machine to make an object that looks as if it were made by hand, something that has been a subtext to manufacturing since the beginning of the 19th century. Nor is her approach to be understood as a manifestation of the familiar idea of the customized and the somewhat inauthentic outcome of multiple options for consumers. The latest incarnation of this is what is described as mass customization. It is a development that is driven by new production techniques that do away with the need for costly tooling and instead rely on the digital, so-called printing techniques that build complex forms without molds or tools, and so remove the purpose and the benefits of uniformity. When there is no mold, there is no need to make large numbers of identical objects that look exactly the same, simply in order to amortize costs over a long production run. When the quality of production can be taken for granted, there is no purpose in pursuing precision or repetition for its own sake. It becomes possible to introduce the potential of variation from a perceived norm into the process, to exploit the possibilities of imperfection by tinkering with mass production methods offers the opportunity to soften and domesticate industrially made objects and to give them the charisma of the individual and the original. It is to suggest that a particular vase, glass or chair is not the same as all the others and so can be understood as distinctively personal, or to use a word which has more positive connotations than imperfect, is to be unique. Imperfection can be suggested by the traces of the weaving loom or the process marks required by color printing textiles, or by the use of upholstery buttons that do not match, or by deconstructing the glass-making process in order to show the marks of the hand. This is not to be confused with the skill of the craft maker. It is closer to what Rei Kawakubo, the Japanese fashion designer, once described as a continuous search to introduce special qualities to the fabrics woven for her garments, even if necessary, by tampering with the machinery of the looms that made them. Imperfection is a new take on old ideas. It is the concept of wabi-sabi that still underpins Japanese culture's view of aesthetic quality. Wabi is the quality of rusticity. It suggests the potential to find resonances in the accidents of construction. Sabi refers to the patina of age and wear. Wabi-sabi is the acceptance that perfection is elusive and that beauty is to be found in its absence. Wabi-sabi is a form of the aristocratic preference that many cultures share for the old and the weathered, set against the vulgarity of the new. On one level, the post-industrial interest in imperfection is a reflection of the cult of imperfection that has its roots in the West, in the writings of John Ruskin and William Morris. They railed against the tyranny of the machine and the straight-jacketed perfection that is imposed on the craftsman. Ruskin was equally outspoken in his attacks against the constraining hand of the designer, who insisted on a precise and lifeless delineation of every detail, and so removing any possibility of self-expression by the artisan. In The Seven Lamps of Architecture, Ruskin suggested that, in pursuit of imperfection, the laying of color by a mechanical and its tone under a vulgar eye are far more offensive than rudeness in cutting the stone. The latter is imperfection only, the former deadness or discordance. Handwork might always be known from machine work, however. At the same time, it was possible for men to turn themselves into machines and to reduce their labor to the machine level. But so long as men work as men, putting their heart into what they do and doing their best, it matters not how bad workmen they are. They will be there in that handling which is shown above all in price. It will be plainly seen that some places have been delighted in more than others. Torsten Veblen mounted an assault on this idea of imperfection in his book, The Theory of the Leisure Class. A limited edition, he said, is in effect a guarantee, somewhat crude it is true, that this book is scarce and therefore is costly, and lands pecuniary distinction to its consumer, he wrote. Hence has arisen the exaltation of the defective, of which John Ruskin and William Morris were such eager spokesmen in their time, and on this ground their propaganda of crudity and wasted effort has been taken up and carried forward since their time. But Ruskin had many enthusiasts. His essential point was distilled by Charles Rennie Mackintosh from an observation by the architect in his characteristic font that, as he put it, there is hope in honest error, none in the icy perfection of the mere stylist. And it is this that will continue to find a contemporary sense of luxury, even after the significance of the object in this digital era has faded. Thank you.